The significance of Christ's death and his later resurrection is often brought out. But what is so significant about his burial? Jesus Christ was crucified on a cross. And normally when a person was crucified, he was left to hang on a cross, serving as a deterrent alongside the road, telling people this is what happens to those who defy Rome. But Jesus' body would not suffer this fate. Matthew tells us that as evening approached, Joseph of Arimathea, a rich man, went to Pilate and he asked for Jesus' body. And Pilate gave it to him. And Jesus' body was taken. It was wrapped in linen, placed in a new tomb, and a big stone was placed over the tomb. So what is the significance of this burial account? Matthew is making clear that Jesus Christ, through his death and his burial, is continuing to fulfill prophecy. Isaiah was an Old Testament prophet, and he spoke of a suffering servant who took on the sins of his people. And Isaiah spoke of how this suffering servant was buried with the rich in his death. So when Matthew tells us that Joseph of Arimathea was a rich man, this is not an incidental detail. Matthew is showing us that Jesus continues to fulfill Old Testament prophecy. But also what is being made absolutely clear through this is that Jesus is really dead. And his disciples and everyone around them believe this to be true. In fact, the chief priests and the Pharisees go to Pilate and they want to make sure that no one is mistaken about the fact that Jesus has died and that he is buried. They tell Pilate that Jesus was a deceiver and he had predicted that he would be raised from the dead 3 days later. And they said that Jesus' disciples might come in and try to steal the body and convince people that in fact he had been raised. And so Pilate told them to go, make the tomb as secure as you can. And so Jesus' body was placed in a tomb. A large stone was rolled in front of it. A seal was placed over the tomb, the penalty of which, if anyone broke it, was death. And a guard was posted outside the tomb. Jesus was dead, and he was not coming back. This was the belief that everyone had. And the implications of this are staggering. Luke's gospel in particular brings out just how much hope the people had placed in Jesus as the Messiah and the redemption that the Messiah would bring. This was the child whom Simeon stayed alive for as an old man, waiting to see the Christ before he would die. This was the man who followed the law perfectly, who could heal the blind and the lame, who could calm the storm and conquer chaos and nature itself. This is the man who set the world on fire, preaching about the kingdom of God, about a better hope, a better king, a better way of life, a better world, who would tell people about the God of Israel and whom the nations would all gather around and finally acknowledge that the God of heaven was the one and only true God of this world and of the universe. And if God could abandon Jesus, if he could abandon his own son, then what hope was left for them? Luke tells us of two disciples who were walking along the road to Emmaus, a small village outside of Jerusalem. And a stranger appeared to them. And they told him about this Jesus Christ, how he had gone around doing great things, and how they had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. But now that hope was gone, dead and buried. Redemption itself was dead and buried. The disciples were utterly hopeless on Saturday. The death and burial of Jesus is the death and burial of all hope. It is the cold realization of a funeral. It is a father who loses his job and finally has to clear out his office, come home, and tell his family. It is a wife who has a nagging realization that something is wrong and discovers that her husband is having an affair. Parents who raise their children in godly homes, only to have their children live far away from God, get sick, or come down with cancer. Chelsea, the sweet little girl that I knew, who came down with leukemia, not only died, but was buried. And her father, her mother, and her sweet little sister had to go to her funeral. It must create an ache in their hearts every day that never goes away. I can remember hearing of a man who attended a funeral and he was grieving for his wife of many decades. And someone trying to be comforting said to him, "She's not here, she's in heaven." And the man said, "The woman that I know is right there in the ground." But my friends, this is not the end of the story. Sunday is coming. Resurrection Day is coming. Tomorrow will be a new and better day. And that stranger who was walking alongside the disciples on the road to Emmaus, that was Jesus Christ, already raised from the dead. So how about you? What do you think the disciples must have felt when Jesus was dead and buried and in the ground? When have you felt forsaken by God or by others? And how do we help one another through these times?